The Innocence Project, founded in 1992 by Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, is a nonprofit national litigation and public policy organization dedicated to exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals through DNA testing and reforming the criminal justice system to prevent future injustice. The Innocence Project was established in the wake of a landmark study by the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Senate in conjunction with the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law, which found that incorrect identification by eyewitnesses was a factor in more than 70% of wrongful convictions. The original Innocence Project was founded in 1992 by Scheck and Neufeld as part of the Cardozo School of Law of Yeshiva University in New York City. One of the Innocence Project's most famous cases, thanks to the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer, is the exoneration of Steven Avery. At the age of 22, he was wrongfully convicted of rape and spent almost 20 years in prison before he was exonerated because of DNA testing. On July 29, 1985, at about 3:50 p.m., Penny Ann Bernstein was out running along the Lake Michigan shoreline and was apprehended by an unknown man who forced her into a wooded area and sexually assaulted her. Based on a physical description of her attacker, police provided a photo array of 9 men. Bernstein selected Steven Avery's picture. He was arrested the next day. At trial, Bernstein identified him as her attacker. A state forensic examiner testified that a hair recovered from a shirt of Avery's was consistent with Bernstein's hair. Avery presented 16 alibi witnesses, including the clerk of a store in Green Bay, Wisconsin, who recalled Avery accompanied by his wife and 5 children buying paint from the store. A checkout tape put the picture of the purchase at 5:13 p.m. Bernstein put the attack at 3:50 p.m. and estimated it lasted 15 minutes, which meant that Avery would have had to leave the scene of the attack, walk a mile to the nearest parking area, drive home, load his family into the car, and drive 45 miles in just over an hour. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours and convicted Avery almost exclusively on the eyewitness account. On December 14, 1985, he was sentenced to 32 years in prison. After losing several appeals, a petition for DNA testing was granted in 1995, and it showed that scrapings taken of Bernstein's fingernails contained the DNA of an unknown person. The tests were unable to eliminate Avery, however, and a motion for a new trial was denied. In April 2002, attorneys for the Wisconsin Innocence Project obtained a court order for DNA testing of 13 hairs recovered from Bernstein at the time of the crime. The state crime lab reported that using the FBI DNA database, it had linked a hair to Gregory Allen, a convicted felon who bore a striking resemblance to Avery. Allen was then serving a 60-year prison term for a sexual assault in Green Bay that occurred after the attack on Bernstein. On September 11, 2003, a request brought by the Manitowoc District Attorney's Office and the Wisconsin Innocence Project to dismiss the charges was granted, and Avery was finally released. In 2005, with support from Bernstein and Avery, the Wisconsin Department of Justice adopted a model eyewitness identification protocol. In 2009, James Bain was released from prison after 35 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. He was arrested in 1974 at the age of 19 and remained behind bars until he was 54. On the evening of March 4, 1974, a 9-year-old boy sleeping at his home in Lake Wales, Florida, was dragged to a baseball field and raped. The victim told police that his assailant appeared to have been 17 or 18 years old and had a mustache and bushy sideburns. According to the victim, the man had said his name was Jim or Jimmy. The victim's uncle thought this description sounded a lot like Jimmy Bain. Police showed the victim 5 or 6 photographs of potential suspects, and he chose the one of Bain. However, of the photographs in the lineup, only Bain and one other man had sideburns. The police questioned Bain at his home at around midnight on March 5th, 1974. Bain said that he had been at home watching TV at the time of the attack, an alibi that was supported by his sister. Nevertheless, the police arrested him. According to FBI analysis presented at the trial, the rapist did leave semen on the victim's underwear. The trial occurred, however, before DNA testing was available, so Bain could not be definitively tied to the semen. He could, however, match his blood group. An FBI analyst testified that the semen on the underwear was of blood group B. Bain's blood group was AB, but according to the analyst, Bain's group had a weak A, and thus he could not be excluded from having deposited the semen. An expert for the defense testified that Bain's group actually had a strong A, and therefore he could be definitively excluded. In spite of this conflicting serological evidence and Bain's alibi, Bain was convicted of rape, kidnapping, and burglary and sentenced to life in prison. The prosecution's case rested largely on the victim's ID of Bain in the photo lineup. A 2001 Florida statute made it possible for certain cases to be reopened for DNA testing. Upon hearing this, Bain presented 4 handwritten motions for the DNA evidence in his case to be tested. In all, the case came before the court 5 times and was denied all 5 times. With the aid of the Innocence Project of Florida and 10th Judicial Circuit Public Defender Bob Young, Bain was finally granted access to post-conviction DNA testing. The state sent the DNA found on the victim's underwear to the DNA Diagnostics Center. This testing excluded Bain as the source of the DNA. The Polk County State Attorney Jerry Hill then joined the defense in a motion to declare Bain innocent. On December 17, 2009, a judge signed the order releasing Bain from prison after 35 years. Bain received $1.7 million from the state of Florida for his wrongful conviction, $50,000 for every year he spent in prison. Bain is a leading advocate for the innocence movement, sharing his wrongful conviction experience from middle schools to colleges across the country. During an event at Florida Southern College, a student asked him what he thought about all the technology he's seen since its release. Bain said that cars and telephones were the most surprising for him. Even though there had been cars before he was incarcerated, he explained that there were none that talked back to me. He is married, has a young son, and is now in the process of writing a book. The work of the Innocence Project has led to the freeing of 342 wrongfully convicted people based on DNA, including 20 who spent time on death row, and the finding of 147 real perpetrators. Almost 99% of the convictions proven to be false were of males, with minority groups also disproportionately represented, about 70%. The National Registry of Exoneration lists 1,579 convicted defendants who were exonerated through DNA and non-DNA evidence from January 1st, 1989 through April 12th, 2015. According to a study published in 2014, more than 4% of people sentenced to death from 1973 to 2004 were probably innocent. The Innocence Project works to correct these wrongs.